Hello. So with this lecture set, we're going to go ahead and start working on the manager feature of our student scheduler. So looking back at our use case document that we had created in week 4, week 5, what we're going to do is we need to implement logins, ability to view students, manage courses, delete courses, and then manually register students. So those are our 4 primary scenarios. Now, we won't cover all of that in today's lecture, but we'll spread some of these steps out through the next couple of weeks worth of lecture. The first thing that we want to do is we want to extend our login functionality so that we can allow a user who is not a student to also log into our system. Now, I've already gone through and made some modifications to the system, but I want to go ahead and highlight those. So going to our Server Explorer under our Week 4 DB context, which is our database, under tables we have 3 new tables that are added. We have a users table, a users roles table, which is the many-to-many table, and then there's a roles table. Now these 3 tables are all empty at this point, but they have the basic mechanics that we need to enable roles. So the users table has username and password. I also added a foreign key for the student ID. So if at some point later we want to migrate all of our student username and passwords into the users table and then simply link off of that student key, we can do that. I have roles, which has an ID and a name, and then users underscore roles has the user ID and role ID as foreign keys. So the users and the roles would be joined through the users roles table. So mimicking that under models, I have created a folder called security, and I created a user class, and I created a role class. And I've decorated these classes with the appropriate table, and I've also created some virtual methods or members for student, and then the student ID field itself. And I also created this virtual for roles, and you'll notice that it's not decorated at all, and I'll talk more about that in just a moment. Roles very much the same way, so we have the ID field, the name field, the class is decorated with the table attribute, and then we have a property here for users. Now, because these the property for users and roles are not actually decorated with any sort of attribute, you may be wondering, well, how do those relationships work? To set that up under the DB context, week 4 DB context, I've done an override on our context on the onModelCreating method. And this method allows you to use what are called the Fluent APIs for Entity Framework to be able to go in and define the same way that you would using those attributes. You can define in code relationships between tables and their properties and how models relate to one another. So I've gone ahead and used the Fluent APIs to define how the users and roles work together. I won't go into a lot of detail on how this works, but the idea behind a Fluent API is the ability for you to read the API or the code as if it was written in a sentence. I've also linked to this article that talks about configuring existing databases with many-to-many. So if you, or when you download this code, you can go ahead and click on that link and it'll take you to that article. But basically we take this model builder that gets passed in and we say we have an entity user, which is our user class and for our user table, and we say that it has many roles. And each role has many users. And these users and roles map to a left key of user ID, a right key of role ID, into a table of user roles. So by setting up that mapping in those relationships, that enables us to build that many-to-many relationship using code first. Now to facilitate the actual authentication process, I needed to also implement a few other changes. So under interfaces, I added a security repository, and it has just some simple methods of get all users, get user by username, get user by ID, get all roles, and get role by ID. So we can go in and start to pull data from our user. Um, Under repositories, I have the accompanying class, which is basically an implementation of those methods. So I have a DB context, and inside of my DB context, I've added a DB set for user and role. I initialize it in the constructor, and then I get all users, returning the context. I get the user by searching on first name, get the user by ID, role, and role by ID. Then inside of my controller for student, I have my login method, and in the post method in particular, what I've done is I first attempt to see if that person logging in is a student. So I go out to my student repository, I say get all students where the email address matches. If that user or that student from the database is not null and the password matches, then I authenticate the user, set the cookie, and then I redirect to the student list. Else, I say this user does not exist as a student in the database. So I go ahead and call to my security repository and I say get user, and then I pass in that same what I'm calling the email address, but it may just be a username, and say does that user exist as a secure user. If the user does not equal null, we have a user, and that user's password matches, then I go ahead and do the forms authentication here as well, and then I redirect them to what will be my admin page. Now, a couple quick modifications. This redirect to action currently goes to the student list. I think I'm going to actually update this, and I'm going to have it redirect to the index action on my schedule controller. And then that way, when the user logs in, it will basically take them to that scheduling page. The redirect to admin will take care of that in our next lecture. And what we'll be doing is we're actually going to be creating an area, they're referred to as areas, and be redirecting our user to that admin area so that they can then manage users and their courses and their registrations.